This is Winning Mealtime. My name is Chris Ying. I'm your field commander as we embark on another campaign against our children who refuse to eat what we want them to eat. We've been making some hay out of our Sunday gravy that we made recently. So we made this Sunday gravy. We extracted all of the delicious meatballs and sausage and pork shoulder. We made spaghetti out of it. I also made ratatouille with that same tomato sauce. And now we're gonna repurpose it one more time. This isn't the last thing you can do with the meaty tomato sauce, and you should absolutely freeze it, whatever you have left over, because it comes in so handy. A super umami, sweet and sour, delightful tomato sauce is infinitely useful. But the last thing we're gonna make for now is a burrito. Beefy bean and beefy bean and cheese burritos. Burritos with beefiness. Bean and cheese burritos are a miracle. They're insanely helpful. My kids eat them all the time. I try to make them from scratch. If not, this is what they will always eat. And I feel happy about it. I think beans are really good for you. I just want to pump them full of calories anyway. So cheese and tortillas, it all works out magnificently. Here's the rub. Refried beans are only good when they're made with animal fat. So the other night I actually made a batch of refried beans using the fat from a chuck roast I roasted. So it was like a beefy refried beans, but traditionally you're gonna use pork fat, which is what we started over here. I started making a super simple version of carnitas. So this is eventually gonna become part of our beans, but it's a bonus recipe for winning mealtime here. The key to beans tasting good is meat fat. I don't care what anybody else tells you. The thing that makes beans palatable is having lots of fat. And so I'm making the simplest version of carnitas, not the traditional way necessarily, but just the easiest way, which is to cut a boneless pork shoulder or whatever cut of pork you want, put it in a pan, cover it with water, and let it render and simmer. In fact, I might not even add water. I might just cook it in its own goo with some oil. That is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna cook it covered so we can get that fat. We're gonna get all that delicious fat out of it. And then I will show you 2 ways that we can use these carnitas later. Also, they're incredibly delicious for full-grown humans too. So that's it. Salt, pork in the pan, good amount of oil. Now I'm adding some grapeseed just because it was there. And you're kind of just somewhere between frying and confitting this pork. And I do it with the lid on for a while. And that's it. We're gonna let it hang out. Like I said, all of the liquid is cooked out of this. It's sort of confitting, it's sort of frying in its own delicious fat until it's got this browned, crispy, you can see it's falling apart. It's a wonderful, delightful texture. My kids, this is hit or miss with my kids. My daughter, again, who's a good eater, will eat carnitas, will eat tacos, happily. My son, maybe. But if they're meat eaters, serving this just as is, little cubes of meat. I've had some success with this with my more difficult child, Keith. So again, if you don't want to make carnitas, if you don't want to make a chuck roast, render a bunch of bacon. What you're after is that fat. So we're gonna start with the bean side of this thing. Take half an onion or a whole onion. I just happen to have half of an onion. Just gonna take a bunch of fat, maybe a couple of stray pieces of meat end up in there, all the better. But for 2 cans of beans, half a cup, 3/4 of a cup of fat. The fat part is everything. And I have actually run an empirical test on this. No joke. When I was in my 20s, 3 years ago, we rented a house with a bunch of friends. I cooked for everybody. I made 2 batches of refried beans, one with pork fat from a batch of carnitas and one without. Here's the thing. I'm gonna end up doing a very hacky thing here anyway, which is that I'm just gonna puree all of this into refried beans. So I'm just throwing the garlic cloves in there whole because they're gonna get pureed anyway. 2 cans of beans. I will drain my beans if I'm gonna cook 3 cans of beans, then I'm gonna drain 1 of them because I don't want all of that liquid. But for this refried beans, I'm gonna leave all the liquid in for now because it's gonna make it easier for me to puree these beans when there's liquid in there. And then I'm gonna cook it down and cook that liquid out. Plus that bean liquid is delightful. It's all super starchy, thick bean juice that's gonna give this whole thing body anyway. A little MSG. And then I guess I'll put some onion powder, put a little cumin in there. So I'm just gonna let this sweat for a couple of minutes in all of this fat. I don't want it to brown, I don't need any color, I just wanna cook the rawness out of it. In the meantime, go get yourself a drink, watch a commercial, scratch an itch, listen to the Terminator 2 soundtrack, do something. We'll be right back. Okay, so these onions they're actually getting a little color, so I'm done sweating these. In go the beans. You can do whatever you want. You like black beans, use black beans. I used to be a exclusively black bean guy. I've since returned to the fold with, I am gonna pour off a little bit of the bean water, realizing these beans are especially wet. A little bit of, let's say, paprika, because we feel like it. They don't need anything. The beans don't need anything, really. They need salt and fat. So there's a couple of directions we can go now. I'm gonna make beefy, sort of like, for lack of a better way of describing it, a fast food style ground beef and bean burrito. But another path you can take, and I did this the other night when I was making these for my kids. Again, I'm not like some kind of meat evangelist. I don't, like my daughter has started flirting with the notion of vegetarianism. My only concern is just like, I want to make sure they're getting protein. My son doesn't love to eat meat, frankly. He eats meat in very specific forms and meatballs and dumplings and things like that, but he just won't eat like a piece of meat. And it's 50-50 if he'll eat a beefy burrito. So what I did the other day, oh my God, it's so good, was I took some of the chuck roast that I had cooked and basically cooked until it was fork tender and just threw it in with the beans and blitzed it all into a puree. So it's refried beans with meat in it. And you could do the same thing with this carnitas over here if you wanted to. If you want to just like puree it into the beans, then that'll absolutely work. I also recognize that pureeing your refried beans in a blender is not traditional. But I got kids and I'm in a hurry and I'm trying to get this thing done, so I'm gonna do it. Now we're just gonna sort of let these simmer. There's nothing complicated about this. There's no secret seasoning that's gonna make them amazing, except for animal fat. And so like I said, if you're not making a big batch of meat that's gonna give you a bunch of fat, just render off a bunch of bacon and use bacon fat. It'll be smoky, it'll be bacony, and it does need to cook. And it does need a little salt. Let that simmer, let some of the liquid come out of it, let some of the water evaporate. I'm gonna make the ground beef part of this now. So into a pan, I was about to pour some olive oil, which you can use. You should use whatever oil you have on hand. But again, I have a bunch of delightful pork fat here, so why would I not do that? All right, so this will be super simple. Ground beef, there's no substitute for just working this. I don't like clumps of beef. I like, you know what I mean? Like it's that Taco Bell thing. I just want the beef to be super broken down and not chunks. And if somebody else out there has a technique for how to achieve that, add a little salt, other than just hard work, determination to break it up with a spatula, I'm all ears. The nice thing about a burrito is it's all going the same place anyway. The other little weird hack I discovered today, Ira, we'll see if it works out. So my kids are so persnickety about hot food. They want warm lunches. And my son's preschool, they will sometimes heat up his food for him. My daughter's elementary school, she'll sometimes order the school lunch because it's warm. But if something she doesn't like, she wants, we make her home lunch. So I try to make her hot food in this thermos. But you're like a little limited with what you can put into a cylindrical thermos. And again, I'm not condoning this because I don't know if it worked. I'll find out this afternoon when my daughter gets back from school. But I made her a little bean and cheese burrito and then I stuck it in the thermos and sealed it. And I'm hoping it provides the kind of insulation to keep her burrito warm for 2 hours. Oregano, cumin, onion powder, paprika. Once it's broken up and the meat's not threatening to reform into clumps like T-1000 and Terminator 2. Again, this is the Sunday gravy tomato sauce. Just a couple of ladles of that. It's all about having this utility weapon at your disposal. You know they like that. You know why they like it. It's umami, it's a little sweet, it's a comforting, familiar flavor. You just need to sort of deploy it in different ways. I am willing to wager that while I'm using the sauce from our Italian-American Sunday gravy to make these beefy burritos for my children, I'm certain it will not taste like I'm making a spaghetti and meatballs burrito. I'm positive of that. And key to that is just gonna be making sure I add lots of seasoning. It needs a little bit like like I said, the tomato sauce got a little concentrated. It's a little acidic, so I want to balance it with some sugar. That's basically done. I want to let it simmer for as long as I can. If you let it simmer for a while, if I simmer this like a picadillo, if I simmer this for an hour, it just won't have the chew of a hamburger. So we're gonna let that simmer for a minute while I also reduce these beans down a little bit by cooking off some of the liquid. When we come back in just a second, I will finish this all off, wrap a couple of burritos that we can stick in a thermos and ship our children off to military school with. I'm in the coal mine. We're right back. The ground beef has simmered for, say 10, 15 minutes. I'm not saying you should make refried beans from scratch and the beef filling from scratch in order to get a burrito. You shouldn't spend 45 minutes, an hour, 3 hours with the pork to make a single bean and cheese burrito for your kids. Like, that's not how this works. I would have made the beans and the carnitas as a meal of their own. We would have had a taco night. We would have done carnitas and refried beans, and then the beans would have gone in the fridge. The carnitas goes in the fridge. This would have been another night's meal, the Sunday gravy. We would have had this, or it would have been in the freezer. Honestly, I always have this meaty tomato sauce in the freezer. This I might have made that morning or that evening right before I'm gonna serve it. Or if I'm having a good week, which are few and far between these days, I would have made this beef on Sunday, knowing that some point during the week I was gonna need to serve the kids a burrito, or a tostada is a huge thing for us. We would have had taco night, something like that. I would have made this in advance. So when it would have come down to it, when it would have finally come time to have a bean and cheese burrito that I'm making for Ruby or Keith for lunch or dinner or whatever, I would be pulling this meat out of the fridge. I'd be pulling these beans out of the fridge, which also are great to serve to the kids when they come home from school, afternoon snack, whatever. So anyway, I wouldn't be making all this a la minute. This is all about meal planning, right? Like, that comes out of the fridge, that comes out of the fridge, this comes out of the freezer. That was dinner 2 nights ago. That's where I'm getting the fat for the beans. Like, part of winning this thing is taking the time, and I would do this every Monday. Sit there and just block out how I can make one day of cooking last 7 days. And that's what it would be. I would have made this sauce and that in one day. So don't watch what I'm doing now and think I'm telling you should make all of this from scratch to make a single burrito, a single meal. That is so dumb. You could do it this way and go in reverse, right? You could say, all right, the first meal is going to be this burrito, but out of that burrito, I'm going to have made carnitas. I'm going to have made refritos. I'm gonna have this, the picadillo, or whatever you wanna call it, the beef, and I'm gonna reuse those in different ways in the rest of the week. So just let that be known that I'm not an idiot. Again, I'm using these delightful flour tortillas that we got from Caramello in Kansas. We just happen to have these. We're very, very, very fortunate to have these in the studio. I like to put a little cheese in there while I'm still heating my tortilla. All right, that is heated through. Take a little bit of beef. And by the way, if I had made all of this in advance, if I had a big batch of the beef and I had a big batch of beans in the fridge, I would have literally just mixed them all together in a bowl and microwave them all together. Just exactly 1 burrito's worth of meat and beans, and microwave that and done it this way. So a little bean. If I had more time, I would have actually cooked these beans a little longer so they get a little bit thicker. But this is about the size of a burrito. And I'm not just patting myself on the back. The real reason why this looks so good, I just want to take a moment to say this, is when you have these really, really, really good flour tortillas that have such a high fat content in them and are so thin that they become translucent as like the fat heats up and becomes almost see-through. Like that's what you want to see in a burrito, is when it like when it's hot and it's warm, you can almost see through the damn thing. It's so good. This is the size of a burrito that would fit in my daughter's thermos. I would take this thing, would drop it in the thermos, tighten the cap, and away she goes. I fold it like this instead of the way they would fold it at a taqueria because my daughter can then easily just lift this part up and get into it. But that's it. That is a beefy bean and cheese burrito that I will serve the kids all the time using the tomato sauce from our Sunday gravy from the weekend, using some refried beans that we also made for another meal at some point, squirrel that away, carnitas, or whatever fat you want to use. Like I said, you can make it without making carnitas. You can just render a bunch of bacon to make your beans, and then the beef using the Sunday gravy. That's all she wrote. And this is the product of our work. When we're trying to get the kids to eat, it's all about one meal at a time. And I think you would win with this one. That's the bean and cheese burrito. If you want to see how we made the Sunday gravy, you can click here-ish to find out where that came from. If you want to see another use for that same Sunday gravy tomato sauce, click over here for our ratatouille recipe. Again, make all this stuff in advance. Preparation is key to winning mealtime against your children. So I will be here fighting the good fight with you next time. I'll talk to you soon.